I was grabbing a drink with an old college friend recently, a guy who spent the last decade building AI startups. He was riding high, showing me a demo on his phone of a new autonomous negotiator he'd designed. He was buzzing with this almost manic optimism, talking about how technology was finally going to outrun human error. "We're fixing the bugs in civilization," he said, leaning back with this incredibly self-assured grin. To him, the future wasn't just bright, it was calculated, optimized, and perfectly under control. But then the conversation drifted. Someone at the table mentioned the news from January 2026, the latest update from the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. I watched my friend's expression shift instantly. That smug, "tech will save us" glow vanished. When I mentioned the Doomsday Clock had been set to 85 seconds to midnight, he didn't argue with data or pivot to a new feature release. He just stared at his drink. This man, who trusted algorithms to solve everything, suddenly looked like he'd seen a ghost. He muttered something about how his own industry was now one of the very variables the scientists were terrified of. It was a jarring reversal. One minute, he's the master of the universe. The next, he's a passenger on a ship with no one at the wheel. That specific number, 85 seconds, seemed to puncture his entire worldview. It wasn't a countdown to a literal explosion, but the symbolic weight of it felt more real to him than any market projection he'd seen all year. It made me wonder, how did we get to a point where the most advanced era in human history is also the one most paralyzed by its own shadow? Why is the world officially closer to disaster than it has ever been, even at the height of the Cold War?
Yeah, I mean, that reaction from your friend, that makes complete sense. Because that 85 seconds to midnight marker, it represents this terrifying convergence of crises.
Right. It's not just one thing.
Exactly. It's a symbol created back in 1947 to communicate global danger. But today, we're looking at three highly specific intersecting drivers. We're talking about the complete breakdown of nuclear diplomacy, the physical realities of climate change, just, totally outpacing our political agreements, and this massive governance gap around godlike technologies like AI and biotechnology.
And, for you listening to this deep dive, we really want to establish right up front that we aren't exploring this just to induce panic.
Right, definitely not.
We want to understand the actual mechanics of these global risks. Because danger isn't some predetermined fate, It's the direct result of human choices.
It's all about choices. And the first set of choices we need to look at involves that first driver, the nuclear void, and the breakdown of global communication.
Yeah, let's get into that, because I was reading this incredibly detailed account from a retired arms control observer. This guy spent 40 years tracking the hotlines between global powers.
Wow, 40 years, so he's seen it all.
And he described the mid-2020s not as this sudden explosive conflict, but as a great silencing. He pointed to the late 2010s as this specific pivot point where the U.S. moved toward a much more isolationist, confrontational stance.
Yeah, and they started dismantling these treaties that had literally taken decades to negotiate.
Exactly. And the Observer shared this one story about a junior diplomat stationed in Vienna. He was sitting in this secure room just waiting for his Russian counterpart to answer a totally standard, routine verification query.
It's a normal check-in.
Right, just standard protocol.
Yeah.
But as he's sitting there, he realizes that the protocol had been completely scrapped by an executive order half a world away. And the fear in that room wasn't about some planned nuclear strike. It was the terror of the void, the terrifying silence where communication used to be.
The journalist who originally covered that story noted this profound sense of vertigo, like realizing that a strategy of maximum pressure often just breaks the very valves designed to prevent an accidental apocalypse.
Yeah. And the human cost is just this pervasive, quiet dread that the safety net has been totally cut away, leaving us 85 seconds from midnight without the tools to stop it.
And really quickly, we must explicitly state to you listening that our discussion of U.S. isolationist policies, those late 2010s executive orders, and their impact on treaties is an impartial reporting of the provided historical and policy text.
Absolutely. We are strictly conveying the historical events that experts attribute to these heightened nuclear tensions. Neither of us, nor this deep dive, are taking a political side, endorsing these viewpoints, or criticizing any specific administration.
Right. We're just looking at the mechanics of the history.
Yeah.
And mechanically, this threat is a lot like systematically snipping the wires of a building's fire alarm system just because there hasn't been a fire in a few years.
Because the immediate danger isn't spontaneous combustion.
Exactly.
The danger is that when a spark inevitably happens, your entire alert infrastructure is completely dead. You're blind.
You're totally blind. And grounding this in the history of the Doomsday Clock, really puts it in perspective. Like, in 1953, the clock hit 2 minutes to midnight at the start of the nuclear arms race.
Right, the hydrogen bomb tests.
Yeah. But this current 85-second mark is uniquely dangerous because of the breakdown in foundational trust. Back then, they were building the hotlines. Now we're cutting them. And when international cooperation weakens, solving any shared threat just becomes exponentially harder.
Which perfectly transitions us to the second major driver, because we are seeing that exact same breakdown in political treaties when it comes to the climate.
Yeah, the environmental protection side is it's breaking down in real time.
There's this heartbreaking story about a woman named Alana. She was a librarian and a community leader in a coastal town that essentially vanished between 2018 and 2026.
Just washed away.
Yeah. And she talked about watching the news back in 2017 when the U.S. announced its withdrawal from major climate accords. For her town, it felt like the fire department going on strike while their own roof was actively smoldering.
And again, applying our strict rule here, we want to explicitly state to you that discussing the 2017 U.S. withdrawal from these climate accords is strictly an impartial reporting of the historical text. We aren't taking a political side or criticizing the complex economic pressures of the time.
We're just conveying the timeline. And for Alana, that timeline meant a massive lag time. There were years spent debating the economic costs of green transitions, but the physical cost was being paid in storm surges and failed harvests right in her backyard.
Because by the time agreements were eventually re-entered, the atmospheric momentum had already completely bypassed the political momentum.
Right, and she said, for her, the Doomsday Clock is a literal tide gauge. It's this tragic irony of spending years arguing over the ink on a page, while that same ink is literally washed away by rising seas. People felt like political ego was prioritized over the literal ground beneath their feet.
And the hard scientific data validates her reality completely. The physical climate overshoot is staggering. I mean, we breached the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit for a 3-year period ending in 2025.
Wait, a full 3-year period above 1.5?
Yeah. And 2024 alone hit 1.55 degrees above pre-industrial levels. We're seeing Earth's elevated energy imbalance, or EEI, aggressively accelerating global warming.
Because more heat is coming in than can escape?
Exactly. And the specific details are terrifying. In 2023, we saw an unprecedented weakening of natural land-based carbon sinks. Certain ecosystems, like major African rainforests, underwent so much stress that they actually inverted. They turned from carbon sinks into emission sources.
Wow, so the forests were actually releasing carbon instead of absorbing it.
Yeah, total biological inversion. And that triggers cascading tipping points. We're talking about the potential collapse of the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, which regulates global weather.
Hey.
Plus, the Greenland ice sheet is currently losing 30 million tons of ice every single hour. And we're seeing the early stages of dieback in the Amazon rainforest.
30 million tons an hour. It's comprehensible.
And it cascades into human health and resources, too. We're seeing accelerating global groundwater depletion because climate-disrupted aquifers just can't recharge.
Right, because the rain patterns are totally shifting.
Exactly. And the heat expansion is creating massive new mosquito habitats. That caused a massive surge in dengue fever, hitting a record 14.2 million cases globally in just 2024.
Okay, but this makes me want to push back on something. If the 1.5 degree threshold has already been breached for 3 years, and tipping points like the AMOC and the Greenland ice sheet are potentially locked in, and is this whole concept of a post-overshoot recovery just a comforting illusion? Like, are we just pretending we can fix it later?
Well, yeah. The data suggests we are entering an era of permanent alteration, not just a temporary disruption that we can reverse with some magical future tech.
Which is terrifying, because it means we have to adapt to a permanently altered planet.
Exactly. And adapting requires global cooperation, which brings us right to the third major driver, the governance gap in the age of godlike technology.
Right, the pivot from the physical climate to the digital realm. And this is where we meet Elias. He was a software developer in a high-tech hub in early 2026.
Oh, the trading algorithm story.
Yeah, he basically discovered this autonomous trading algorithm that was built on an open source framework with literally zero oversight. And it started hallucinating. It began executing aggressive market maneuvers that perfectly mimicked a cyber attack on a rival nation's power grid.
A completely hallucinated act of cyber warfare.
Exactly. So Elias starts frantically searching for some kind of global authority to step in, like a UN for AI, but he finds nothing, just this fragmented mess of nationalistic regulations.
Because global governance had been so weakened by years of distrust and the abandonment of multilateral cooperation in the early 2020s.
Right. He was basically a man holding a digital live wire, and there's absolutely no one to call to turn off the power. It perfectly highlights this governance gap. We're sprinting ahead with godlike technology using a completely broken tribal political toolkit.
And to remain perfectly neutral here, we must state to you listening that mentioning these nationalistic America first or China first mentalities is, once again, strictly an impartial reporting of the historical text. We're not taking sides or criticizing any nation's specific digital sovereignty policies.
Absolutely. But the objective takeaway from Elias's panic is that in a connected world, a lack of global ethics is effectively a suicide pact for everyone. When shared systems fail, nobody wins.
Nobody wins. And if you take Elias's software nightmare and connect it to physical biosecurity, it gets even worse. At the 2025 AI Action Summit in Paris, experts presented findings showing that AI tools applied to life sciences could easily be misused to develop dangerous biological agents.
Like synthesizing a new virus.
Exactly. And our current prohibition norms, like the Biological Weapons Convention, are dangerously outdated. They were written decades before generative AI even existed.
So they have no mechanism for dealing with an algorithm designing a pathogen.
None. What they stressed at the Paris Summit is the pressing need for modular if-then hazard threshold frameworks.
What does that mean practically?
It means tying concrete triggers to predefined responses. Like if the AI detects a sequence for a dangerous pathogen, then it automatically locks the system down. But the problem is how fragmented the global approach is right now.
Right, because different countries are doing completely different things.
Exactly. Take South Korea's national AI biotechnology strategy. It focuses heavily on speed. They want to automate drug discovery with agentic AI, and they maintain their safety and sovereignty by doing all this research in closed network, highly secure environments.
Okay, so it's locked down but moving fast.
Yes. But then you look at the EU Biotech Act, and it treats AI biotech as a strategic asset that requires deep systemic regulation. They specifically codified something called NAS nucleic acid synthesis screening.
Oh, to stop people from just printing dangerous pathogens.
Exactly. It's a legal safeguard. And they use member state-level regulatory sandboxes to force companies to balance innovation with severe biosecurity safeguards.
Okay, so you've got South Korea sprinting in a closed room and the EU building these massive regulatory nets. It's like developing frontier AI and biotech without unified global governance is like laying down tracks for a bullet train while the train is already moving at 300 miles per hour.
Exactly.
And different countries are building completely different sized tracks. It's an engineering marvel, sure, but it mathematically guarantees a catastrophic derailment. Yeah.
Because that's exactly how these three threads come together. The Doomsday Clock, standing at 85 seconds to midnight, isn't the result of a single isolated threat.
Right.
It's the complex intersection of all these things, the dismantled diplomatic communication lines, a crossing of physical planetary climate thresholds, and this profound void in global governance for rapidly accelerating technologies.
But, bringing this immense global scale back down to your reality as a listener, the core message from the scientists to maintain the clock is that, yes, these risks are incredibly high. But danger is not fate. The hands of the clock are moved by human actions. Which means that through scientific integration, responsible leadership, and unified global cooperation, the momentum can actually be reversed.
We have the power to change it.
The ultimate paradox of the Doomsday Clock is that the exact same human ingenuity responsible for pushing the hands forward, the mastery of the atom, the industrialization of the natural world, and the birth of autonomous intelligence contains the precise mechanical capability required to reach in and physically pull those hands back.